What I want to know now is, who is the person that influenced you most in your life and why?
I would say collectively my family. My mother, my father, and then the rest of the family. Just coincidentally, I had to, my grandson is in college taking a psychology course, and he had to interview me a couple of weeks ago about my background, and some of the psychology questions were pretty in-depth. And he asked the same question. And it was my parents and the community at large where I grew up. I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland in the Delmarva Peninsula, in a little town called Nanticoke, Maryland, which is right on the water, part of the Chesapeake Bay water system. And that was a seafood community and farming community in the spring and summer. And as kids growing up, we developed a strong work ethic. Church was mandatory, and you learned to love it. Everybody supported everybody in the community. My neighbors nurtured me. The people across the county nurtured me. So I would say, but the core influence came from my parents, but there was a global influence that came from the community, where family, church, and country was at the center. Yeah. And that sort of stayed with me. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know those experiences well. Mr. Logan.
I would have to echo what my brother Oliver just said. My major influence was my parents, and especially my father. I'm one of 10 kids, next to the oldest, and we grew up initially in West Virginia. I was 11 years old when we moved to Philadelphia. My father was a coal miner, and he was almost killed in a mine cave-in. In fact, we were told he wasn't going to live. He lived, then we were told he'd never walk. He walked. Then he decided to go to Philadelphia. It was during the Second World War, where he could get a job perhaps in a defense factory where they made munitions and all kinds of other things, which he did. Moved us all to Philadelphia, so I grew up from the age of 11 in Philadelphia. And moving to Philadelphia was interesting because I had never gone to school with white kids. Never had a white teacher, never associated or had any involvement with white people. So this was a culture shock for me, coming down from the South in those days, which was totally segregated. I mean, I drank out of the white and colored fountains. I sat in the back of the bus, as all they did from the Eastern Shore. All of those things that you read about, we experienced them.
Yeah.
But again, my family structure was what held me together. And expectations were high. And my father always said, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard this, it's a worn out phrase, but whatever job you do it better than everybody else. And so he would pound that into me, all of us. And so that stayed with me. It's still with me today. That's my influence.
Good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suni. So the next question is a drill down into your character and what it is that makes you tick. And here's the question. What are your top 3 values and why those values?
I would say one is being connected spiritually, being connected in a family sense, and being connected in a community sense. That would be, all of those would be one. And because of my background, as I just described.
Right.
Church, community, God, and country. And by the way, most of the guys in my hometown country served in the military, and they were my role models. And I hadn't planned the military, but that's where I was led. So that's number one. My other value would be team spirit, integrity, because in that community, it was a community of about 500 or 600 people, so we all knew each other. No one went hungry. If during the seafood season, every family didn't own a boat, so those families that didn't own a boat were able they were invited to go on the owner of a boat, a neighbor, and they shared the profits at the end of the day. It was that kind of cohesion, and that's something that's been deep in my heart. The third thing would be professional enrichment and maintaining that, and that's driven by the way I grew up again with a good work ethic and stick-to-itness. Right. Yeah.
Good, and it shows. The values dictate our behavior and our choices, and those choices drive who we are as individuals and who and where we are now.
Yeah, but by the way, I believe when I look back over my life, I think that gave me the foundation to become a risk taker.
Yes.
Because in the seafood community, you're talking going out near the Chesapeake Bay in the wintertime in a 30-foot boat. You could have an accident. But it was our occupation. And that was inherently, that was a risk that you never thought about. You just did it. So I think the risk factor is another risk trait. Yeah.
That was about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 values, but perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for, to be able to share with those of us that are here what kind of character traits you instill and produce the person that you are today. Thank you. Mr. Logan.
In no particular order, I would start with dependability. And that was drummed into me early on as a child. Be dependable. Do what you say you're going to do. No excuses. And so I've lived my life like that. And it served me well throughout my career in corporate America, being dependable. I would say number 2, again, in no particular order, but would be perseverance. If I didn't have that trait, or believe that I had it, I wouldn't be sitting here today, because being turned down for that job and then applying for it a year later, if I had just given up and said, hey, I'm not going to bother anymore because they're not going to hire me because I'm black, hey, things changed. So because of that, it led me to the next step in my career. And that was a critical point, getting that job, because that put me into corporate America and put me in a situation where I could develop and grow. And I guess the major part of my success, and that I believe in fiercely, is loyalty. And I don't care, who you work for, or whether you like the job or don't like the job. While you're there, be loyal. You might want to leave, you might make plans to leave, and you might dislike your supervisor, but while you're in that position, I would say be loyal until you leave.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gentlemen, what are you most proud of?
Would you say that again, please?
What are you most proud of?
Oh, gee, that's a myriad of things. First, I'm proud of my family. I have a great wife, 3 sons, 8 grandkids, and 2 great-grandkids.
Wow.
And I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of how I grew up in the community, the spirit that I learned spiritually, a work ethic. It gave me a foundation of a sense of team building that has allowed me to travel, as George says, all over the world and relate to everybody. It helped me in an intelligence field. I never had a bad source. The other value, I guess, would be, well, I had to write an overview of my bio for a church function, and just somehow I was brainwriting, And for some reason, I included IOBSE. www.bse.com. Everybody go and look at it, because this is a real gem, a real diamond.
Yes.
And that I value that, yeah. Because inherent in being involved in the creation of IOBSE, I think inherent in that is many of the traits that have been instilled in me as a person growing up and professionally. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Well, for me, I guess I would have to start with marrying the right person. My wife, who followed me from Philadelphia to California and then to Minnesota, never complained, and my career was important to her, even though I knew she essentially didn't like Minnesota. But she learned to like it. She was very versatile, and she made the best of where she was. Unfortunately, I lost her to breast cancer, as you know.
Yeah. Amen. Amen.
Indeed.
Amen. Hang in there, brother.
It's one of the challenges and transitions that
Yep.
we experience in life, and it shapes who we
15
are.
years ago. So without her cooperation, because if your wife isn't happy, you're not going to be happy when you make these moves. So without her cooperation, I wouldn't be sitting here. And she used to always say, because we never put off things, we both had the philosophy that do it now, don't put it off down the road a bit or anything. She used to tell me, George, this is not a rehearsal. And, you know, those words were so prophetic, because she did pass, but we never put anything off. We traveled, we went to places that even when we couldn't afford to, we did it. And so I would say that's certainly that's the biggest thing that I'm proud of, my pride and joy, my relationship with my wife and my family.
Now, could I piggyback on that just a little bit?
By all means.
What we see today is marriages lasting anywhere from 48 hours to 48 days. You know, we just celebrated our 54th wedding anniversary.
Woohoo!
And as George said, all of you at some point will pursue and make attachment to a spouse.
Yes.
That bond is so important. In 20 years, we moved 14 times. 2 years in Vietnam in a very high risk operation. Wow. The wife had to steer the family, keep the 3 boys together. And the spouse is so important, a family value. Hang in there with that. Don't forget it. Yeah.
Indeed.
Mm.
Thank you. Two things I'd like to chime in on at this point. I heard this just the other day, and that is, happy wife, happy life. Now, I don't know what that says for you gentlemen in the room, but happy wife, happy life. And the other concept that I'd like to share is this. Both these gentlemen have made reference to their relationships and the significance of relationships. I have, over the past 20 years, conducted more than 500 interviews about people and relationships. Some 48 hours, some 65 years together. And the key for those interviews is to be able to extract what it is that makes for a healthy, happy relationship. And so when my book is out, I'll share that with you as well. But I just wanted to say that virtually everyone that I've talked to, of those 500 plus people and or interviewed, communications was high on the list, very high, either number 1 or number 2. Number 1 or number 2.